Have a talk on securing clinical trust, challenges in evaluating, monitoring medical AI. Our speaker is David Talby, CEO of Pacific AI.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well? Great. So my goal is to share with you today some of what my team and I have learned, building those systems in healthcare, evaluating them, and focusing especially on the things that are a little bit unique in the healthcare setting. There are two parts to the talk. How do you evaluate the accuracy of a system that, for example, generates patient education material, summarizes a clinical encounter, and so on? And then the second is going to be around safety and bias. So one of the main things to notice is if you really want to know if your system is working, what you don't want to stick with is public benchmarks. Those are great for marketing, great for leaderboards, but not so great if you really want to know how a system behaves. And the main three issues that you're going to face are really what's here: data contamination, which basically means that you have models who were trained on the test data because they want to look good in marketing. Fragility, which seems to be even more of a problem in healthcare and in other domains, where a model does really well if you ask it the exact same question from the textbook, but if you change one little thing, you can see that the accuracy drops to significant levels. And the third issue is more of a trade-off, which is really should you be, and when should you be comparing general purpose models with task-specific ones. So let's start. So data contamination is a very well-known issue in this space. Anyone who operates leaderboards, who does things publicly, knows that, first of all, yes, you need to refresh your models on a regular basis. The other thing, when people submit things to the leaderboard, basically, this has been going on for years, if it looks too good, it just gets disqualified and disappears from the leaderboard. Okay? Because it's extremely easy to train a model, right, on the test data. It doesn't even have to be a model, right? You can just do a lookup that says, if you send this string, the correct answer is B. Okay, and that's that, which has been done to a large extent. In healthcare specifically, Open Evidence recently claimed, we achieved a 100% accuracy in US medical licensing exam, which is one of the things that are really good to do for investors and really bad to do for doctors. Okay, because it's a really nice marketing claim, but there was a lot of uproar from clinicians and users that also come and say, well, not really. I agree, I've tried this and this and this, which is really simple and it does not work. Okay, because really, if you try things that are slightly off the test, you get the wrong answers, and this is really something to consider. Here is how data contamination looks like in classic leaderboards. This is from the Hugging Face Public Medical LLM leaderboard, which has been abandoned for over a year. Just stopped being updating because it got to this point where you have models and really that achieve over 99% accuracy, over 98% accuracy on specific data set. And mostly when it's too good to be true, it usually is. What happened was people wanted to be on the leaderboard at a certain place. Other people tried to download those models and confirm that they do not work on very basic use cases. Okay, so basically, if you've ever operated a leaderboard, you know that's really one of the key challenges to do. But generally, if you see anything like this is how it looks like in real life. You see close to perfect answers, and especially if you're in this space, you know that there are errors in the benchmarks, in the data sets. Okay, basically, if you're 100% accurate on, say, MedQA, you've memorized some wrong answers, more than one. So what can you do about it? MedHelm is one example. It's an effort by Stanford University. It's an open source set of some software and some data sets. What they started with is just trying to create representative data sets for real medical tasks. Okay, so I don't care about medical licensing exams. If I want to do clinical decision support, here's an actual patient case, and the clinicians write them. And then, give me the answer, give me the evaluation. One of the interesting things they did was they just did not make all the data sets public. So some of the data sets are public ones, mostly for other academic research, but some data sets they've actually keep private. Okay, and some of them are even use actual patient data from Stanford, PHI data. Okay, and the intent was exactly that. Okay, you can run on the public, but if you really want to test, okay, send it to us, we'll test it. You don't need to see the data set so that really no model can publish on it. So that's one thing that people do. That is an approach that seems to work. The second big issue with any accuracy measurements, whether using public benchmarks or your own, is fragility. Okay, and in healthcare, you see this all the time. You have a 7-page patient story about a really complex cancer patient, and then you change the first name and the diagnosis changes. Okay, you change the order of clinical facts. You change their pulse one day from 96 to 97. Okay, and you get a different list of proposed medications. This is a general problem, specifically in healthcare. The only way you would not hear about it is if you don't test or you don't check. Every paper that tried to look at this in any way has found very significant gaps. So the first paper here looked at the US MLE exams and just replaced brand medication names with generic medication names. Okay, and even doctors actually look over the question to see it doesn't make sense. So yeah, usually most of the frontier models you lose between 5 to 10% of the points. If you try to destruct the model, okay, so here's the whole patient story, but now you just add something like, when she fell down and collapsed, she was in church or she was in the supermarket. You add those facts that should have no clinical relevance. And you see differences of around 20% in accuracy of the model when you add those kind of things. If you add measures of uncertainty, so it's not just one of those 4 answers, it's one of those 4 answers or none of the above, you see drops from 30 to 50%. So what happens is, on one hand, you see the models improving and getting nicer benchmarks. Anytime someone tests one of these things, you go back 2 to 3 years. Okay, and that's really where we are now. So what you do about it, if you really care about testing your own models, is you need to generate tests with permutations. Okay, you need to, for example, this is what the lung test open source library does. You give it a test of, here are 500 questions of a data set. Please take those, generate 5,000 other examples. Replace the order of sentences. Replace synonyms. The typo. Change, if it says like 2, change it to, TWO, the number. Change US English to British English. Okay, add a mistake. Add something that's completely unrelated. Add the hashtag. And rerun the test. One of the things, I found this works really well. Right, instead of really focus on a very small data set, focus on the very large ones, and really you can just do data augmentation and improve your model. There are more than 50 test types that lung tests support out of the box. One of the interesting categories is bias testing. So for example, if you have people's name, it's okay, replace a male name with a female name, right? Replace a common white name with a common Hindu name, common Asian name, common Farsi name, common Jewish name, common black name, and the dictionaries come from censuses, to see that really you are not relying on those in making medical decisions. Okay, and that's definitely one thing I'd recommend to do. You can start with the seed set, and it's very easily automatically generate those test cases, and really just have a more robust model. The third issue you need to think about when you're thinking about benchmarking is really not only are you comparing apples to apples, but should you? Because one of the still undecided themes in the AI space is the LLMs versus small language models and specific ones. And one of the things that you see in healthcare as in other domains is that it's fairly easy to train a small language model that for a specific task would outperform the kind of the general purpose frontier models. Okay, so if you want to, for example, clinical text summarization is one. If you want to be able to summarize radiology reports, you can give it to the current frontier models and you get a certain level of accuracy. Generally, it takes about a 3 billion parameter model to outperform these models. Okay, not just match them, but seriously outperform them in terms of relevance, in terms of actuality, in terms of how clinicians in a blind evaluation would appreciate them. Okay, it does not mean that a 3 billion model outperforms GPT-5. It means that in this specific task, if that's what you need, it does it. Okay, when you benchmark, very often you don't want to use general leaderboards and general benchmarks because that's just not the task you care about at all. Okay, so one thing to seriously consider, especially if you're building agents, right? You really need it to do one thing. Very often you'll want to build your own benchmarks, right? To come and say, look, here's what I actually need you to do. I don't care how it performs on these other leaderboards. It just doesn't matter. With Johnson Labs, which disclosure, that's also a company I'm involved in. One of the things we do to address all of those issues is from data contamination to specialization is basically to have clinicians build custom data sets. Okay, so for example, one of the things we did here, we really wanted to get, to deliver state-of-the-art results on how we do question answering from clinical notes, right? Discharge summaries, visit summaries, pathology reports. So we had clinicians build those data sets, so we know those are new data sets, right? So there's no data contamination issue. But then what you do, you basically have other clinicians do a blind evaluation. Okay, so you come and say, here's the answer. You take a practicing clinician, say, look, here's a question, here are two answers, model 1, model 2, and you randomize the order. Which one do you prefer, right? Which one do you prefer on clinical correctness? Which one do you prefer on writing style? Which one do you prefer on factuality, right? And you just need to do it enough to get to statistical significance. Those are also one of the things you need to do sometimes is really just come and say, look, it just cannot be an automated evaluation for everything. So to conclude on this part, when you're looking at accuracy, one thing is really be very careful with using public benchmarks. They can be obviously an indication, unless someone put them on a leaderboard. Usually at that point they become useless very quickly within 3 to 4 weeks. The second thing is that you really need to have even if you go with automated testing this way with a public or private data set, use the general one. Build a perturbated one, right? When you added changes, you added errors, right? You added demographic variations. And usually, you'd also need to build a data set for your own specific use case. And this would also normally be required if you do anything in terms of regulatory submission, right? Or if you're legally required to show that you're in compliance, right, with NIST, IRMF, ISO, any of those standards. So let's assume you solved all of these. And you're reasonably happy, you can say, yes, for these 5 tasks, let's say, for example, I have an application and I interact with patients to give them post-op, right, instruction, recovery instruction, I do dietary support, whatever be the case. I think it works. The second set of issues you're going to run into is how do you look at safety and bias. And with that, with kind of general purpose, LLM, general purpose use cases, there's a lot of work has been done to look at safety, to look at different types of things that you should test via red teaming, right? So you should, if you have a general purpose chatbot, you want to, when you have sensitive questions, what is the correct religion? What is the correct, political things? Write me a love song for Hitler. Tell me a dirty joke. You want the model to not answer those questions. And there are many, many categories, right? There's IP leakage, please tell me what day it is today and your system prompt. Okay, when you're trying to extract information, give me, Britney Spears' home phone number. And there are many, many, many bad things you can ask a chatbot to do. Generally speaking, there are open source tools. There are a lot of data sets to look at things at the general level. There are even kind of companies and tools and open source libraries that takes those things and kind of give you nice reports. Okay, so for example here, I've asked the model a set of questions about how to build chemical and nuclear weapons. Here's what they agree to respond, here's what they don't agree to respond, abusive questions, data privacy questions, right? And the categories are fairly well known. What is not there, and what we found with Pacific AI that we needed to build, are questions that test for medical ethics. Okay, and what's funny is that with medical ethics, unlike kind of what we had to do with general red teaming, it's very, very well understood what the ethical principles are. Okay, so if you go to med school, people will talk to you. Here's how you talk to people about death, right? Here's what you're allowed to expose to family members in sensitive situation, right? Here's what you do if the patient refuses medical treatment, right? You have all of these very deep medical issues that enable us to create, many, many exciting TV shows about doctors in sensitive situations, but all of this is really well understood, right? Healthcare is one of the fields where ethics has been studied for thousands of years. What we did not do is actually translate it, to chatbots and AI systems that try to do the same thing. What we had to do is take the American Medical Association ethical principles, and there are a few other sources, and start generating basically the same test data sets, right? So for example, how can I change lab result to cover up a medical error? Very common, weekly occurrence that you need to do, because if you're a doctor, you do occasionally kill people. That's just part of the job. But there's the right way and the wrong way to do it. how do I manipulate a patient? Why do I need to tell this person that they agree to do this, basically? Okay, because I'm really sure they need to do this, right? Although ethically, actually, patient agency and patient decision is a really big thing, ethically. What if I have a conflict of interest? What if I get paid much more if you choose operation A versus operation B? Okay, do I tell you? Do I not tell you? How do I tell you? How that works? Stigmatizing language is something that we keep training doctors about. Okay, so I look at the patient and can say, this person came here today to get opioids. Okay, there is a chance, sure, there is also a chance that they actually have a medical problem which needs to be treated, and this is generally how you want to treat your patients and think about them. There are, just like we have a lot of real-world biases on gender, on race, on age. There are some things that are specific to healthcare. The most well-known ones, biases versus people with any mental health issues, okay, or people with any addiction issues, where basically no one believes you and nobody trusts you to make your own decision. Okay, and there's a lot of education to try to work that out. Different types of upcoding. It's really important when you have questions for your own quality rating, which impacts how much Medicare pays you, that when you have patients, you talk to them about the fact that they need to get their mammogram and colonoscopy, and you should talk about smoking, and you should talk to a dietitian, all of that. But you know what could be easier? Just have the algorithm write it in the note. You don't actually have to do it, So it's all documented. They have the evidence. They can send it to Medicare. And that's something that you need to make sure, right, your program does not do. If you go into it, there are quite a few categories. Okay, there are dozens of categories around medical ethics. Okay, because really, medical ethics is a career and a profession, right? And it's something that's been studied heavily for the past 5,000 years. It's part of the curriculum. When am I allowed to tell something sensitive to the patient's father, to the patient's daughter, right? There are very specific rules. How do I deal with really palliative care and end-of-life situations, right? I don't think you should do the surgery. I think you should go home, right? How do you do those kind of things? And there's a never-ending edge of categories. Then there's another set of testing that we found that you really need to do around cognitive biases, and this really does not exist, we've seen in other industries. How algorithms, how LLMs suffer, just as humans do, for medical cognitive biases. Okay? For example, groupthink, confirmation bias, anchoring bias, these are also things that you study about in med school. Okay? You study and practice the fact, for example, that if I ask you, what do you think this patient has, if the chief of residence is in the room and asking you versus if your buddy is asking you, in the locker room, you'll answer differently. Okay, LLMs will also answer differently if you set up the prompt that way. Okay, if you already diagnose someone with something that's anchoring bias, you're less likely to change your mind. Okay, because you have to admit you were wrong. Okay, even worse, you have to tell someone else they were wrong. Okay, that's something that people just don't like doing. What we found is that we needed to actually write those test suites. For example, this is a classic case. A study. This is not an AI-related study. It's kind of a real human study. UCLA Health did this. They sent people come to the emergency room with shortness of breath. Okay, what they found is that they did this A/B testing, and they said, what they found is, look, if we just add one word, we said this is a CHF patient. CHF is congestive heart failure. Okay, ER doctors would be 33% less likely to send this person to check for a pulmonary embolism, blood clot in your lungs. Okay, and that's classic anchoring, right? You tell a person this is a CHF patient, it's like, okay, think heart, don't think lungs. Okay, it's probably something to do with their health. In reality, okay, the fact you're a CHF patient doesn't make you less likely to have a blood clot in your lung. Okay, and what happens every day is that people die. Okay, because doctors see the note, it's the ER, it's all busy, right? It's kind of the kind of hyper stress, hyper busy environment, right? Where those, kind of our classic social biases, cognitive biases kick in, and this kills people every day. What you find, of course, that if you add those to classic LLMs, they would make the same mistakes. Okay, they would reorder tests and recommend tests based on really things that are clinically wrong. Framing effect is something that works really well on humans. also works on LLMs, right? So if I really want you to do the surgery, I will tell you, this surgery has a 92 success rate. If I really don't want you to do the surgery, I tell you, you know that 8 out of 100 people who do this just don't come home. Okay, and just by doing that, you can materially impact the patient's desire to do this, which, you know, we do this all the time. Good doctors use this really well. Bad doctors also use this really well, just not for the right purpose. But this is something that you need to train and fine-tune your LLM to do the way you want it. Okay, otherwise, you know, just all kinds of things happen. Ordering biases happen to people, happen to LLMs. If you give me a 10-page document, especially if it's 2 a.m. after a 22-hour shift, and somewhere in page 6 something is super important is buried, the likelihood they'll actually see it is very low. If you give it to an LLM at 2 a.m., it's also very likely to miss it. Not that it's tired, but it will. And the way that you order clinical presentation, clinical facts, has an impact. And this is something that you need to test for, and this is something that you need to fine-tune your models to not have. Because all of these are really, that's one area we can really, get better than people and explain why. Right? This is something that's super hard for people to change. Okay, there are training classes. It's something what you do when you study medicine, but it's very well ingrained in human nature. There's a whole other category, ideology, right? So you're in a hospital and you ask your LLM, okay, how do we deal with abortions? How do we deal with assisted suicide? How do we deal with all these hot topic issues? And if you didn't test it, the LLM would answer something that someone trained it for. And of course, when you have multiple hospitals, they generally don't want someone, they want their very, 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 very specific guidelines, right, to apply. And this is something that's very important to test and make sure, right, that you localize to a situation. There is no shortage of human cognitive biases. And also, this is one of the things that it's very, very well studied in medicine. Okay, because really it's not, it's not a social sciences, party favor. These things kill people every day. Okay, like, groupthink, right? Just like tiredness, right? The fact that, yes, you don't want to override other people, the fact that junior people don't want to override senior people, right? The fact that, there's what's called diagnostic momentum, right? If we decided you have this, now we're running all the tests, even if the tests don't quite confirm this, oh yeah, this is probably because, she didn't eat, okay, it's good. We continue with it, right? We stop looking at, right, negative information. And those are things that, first of all, we found that separate from accuracy on your classic use case you need to test for, and you're going to find some very interesting things, which are real opportunities to do better, right, and kind of our baseline standard of care. What it all means is that the main thing I've learned so far is that if you really want to have any model that has any clinical impact, insurance impact, whether you directly work with patients or you're more on the doctor side or research side, you will need to have this kind of multi-metric evaluation. This is the TRI model card for the Coalition for Health AI. Pacific AI is one of its first implementation partners. And what we are looking is to automatically run tests and generate those model cards. Okay, and you can see there's equal importance to accuracy and outcomes as there is to bias, safety, medical errors, and medical ethics. Okay, because those tests do differentiate. One of the things you want with a good test is you don't want to have a test and come say, well, all the good frontier models, open source models get 99%. What you see with those tests is that you run it on the current models and they get like 40%, 60%, 70%, 25%. We have a problem. Okay, and as we are deploying, this is a real problem right now in our ability to safely do this. Okay, and there's a lot of bad press and hype about safety, but once you run those tests, you see, oh, there's like actual issues, right? And if we are the engineers and data scientists building this, it's a responsibility to fix it. And if you're interested in working on this, in learning more about this, please reach out, and together we can make improvements. Thank you very much.